You know that feeling when you hear some new health advice and it completely contradicts what you heard last year? Yeah, it's like nutritional whiplash. One day a food is the enemy, the next it's a miracle cure. Well, today we're going to dive deep into maybe the biggest food fight of them all, the war over fats.
And let's just take the perfect example, butter. I mean, for decades, this stuff was public health enemy number one, right? And now, you see headlines everywhere celebrating its big comeback. So what's the real story? Was the science totally wrong back then, or is it wrong now? This one question, really, it gets to the very heart of all this confusion.
And here's exactly what that whiplash looks like in black and white. Back in the 70s, the message from, well, everyone was super simple and absolute. Avoid saturated fat. Period. Fast forward about 50 years, and bam, the headlines are doing a complete 180. So to figure out how we ended up here, we've got to rewind and go back to the beginning of this whole story.
Right, let's get into it. This whole mess didn't just pop up overnight. It's actually the legacy of a really simple, really powerful idea. An idea that, as we're about to see, was also really incomplete. But it was enough to shape decades of health advice.
Okay, so this was the big idea. It was called the lipid hypothesis, and its logic was just so straightforward. It went like this. Step 1, you eat saturated fat. Step 2, that raises your blood cholesterol. And step 3, that high cholesterol causes heart disease. See? It's a super clean A to B to C story. And that's exactly why it was perfect for public health messages. Easy to explain, easy to remember.
But yeah, the problem with simple stories is that they often leave out some huge details. This model had some major cracks. For one, it kind of assumed that if two things are linked, one must cause the other, which isn't always true. It also just lumped all cholesterol together into one single number. And maybe the biggest miss of all, it never asked the most important question. Okay, if we stop eating fat, what are we going to eat instead? And that question is really what brings us to the modern era of nutrition science, because things got a lot more complicated. Researchers started digging into all the messy details, and the nuance they found, well, it completely flipped our understanding of how fats actually work in our bodies.
So for example, we now know that so-called bad cholesterol, LDL, isn't just one single thing. It's more complicated. It actually comes in different sizes. You've got these small, dense, BB gun pellet type particles. Those are the really dangerous ones that can wiggle into your artery walls. But you've also got these large, fluffy, cotton ball-like particles that are way less risky. The old model, it missed this crucial difference entirely.
And this brings us back to that huge, overlooked question. Turns out it really matters what you replace the fat with. This is the absolute key. It's why that old low-fat advice kind of backfired. See, modern studies show if you swap out saturated fats for things like olive oil or fish, polyunsaturated fats, you get a modest health benefit. Great. But if you swap them out for refined carbs, white bread, sugary cereals, low-fat snacks, which is exactly what millions of people did, you actually end up with worse health outcomes.
So if saturated fat isn't the main villain of the story, who is? Well, the scientific consensus today points to a pretty different lineup of suspects. When you look at large, modern studies, the things that consistently pop up as being linked to heart disease are ultra-processed foods, way too much sugar, not moving your body enough, and one other type of fat we definitely need to single out. And that villain is trans fats. If there is one type of fat that science agrees is just plain bad for you, this is it. These are man-made, industrially created fats. You used to find them in a lot of old-school margarines and packaged foods. And the evidence against them is just overwhelming. There's really no debate. They're strongly linked to heart disease and inflammation. This is the stuff you want to avoid, period. Okay, so the science has evolved, right? It's gotten more nuanced. But that new understanding doesn't always make for a clear, simple public health message. And this is where things can get even more confusing. Let's look at this really fascinating case study. It's from a fictional 2026 announcement reported by Ars Technica that shows just how messy things can get. So imagine this. You see a big, bold announcement from health officials. It says, "We are ending the war on saturated fats." Wow, that sounds huge, right? Like a complete reversal of everything we've been told for decades. A massive, game-changing shift. But then, you dig into the actual details, and the source material highlights this giant contradiction. The big, splashy declaration says the war is over, but the actual written guideline in the fine print? It says to limit saturated fat to exactly what it was before, no more than 10% of your daily calories. So, wait, what?
The war is over, but the rules are the same? And to communicate this new message, they rolled out a new visual aid. They took the old food pyramid, flipped it upside down, and called it the food funnel.
And this is where it gets just bizarre. According to the report, instead of having clear, stacked layers like the old pyramid, it was just this jumbled spectrum of foods. So portion sizes, total guesswork. And the widest part, the top of the funnel, it had red meat, cheese, and a big old stick of butter right there, which seems to, completely contradict that written 10% limit. It's a visual that honestly seems almost designed to create confusion, not clear it up.
And then there's this piece of the puzzle. The Ars Technica article goes on to report that according to documents they saw, several of the experts who actually came up with these new guidelines had financial ties to industry groups, like the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the National Dairy Council, among others. And naturally, that raises some questions about potential conflicts of interest.
So you've got evolving science on one hand and confusing policy messages on the other. It's a mess. So how do we, find some actual clarity in all this chaos? Let's just cut through all that noise and focus on some practical, simple principles that the evidence actually supports.
Honestly, if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. Stop obsessing over single nutrients. Forget about isolating saturated fat or cholesterol or any one thing. Instead, zoom out and focus on the overall quality of your entire diet. That's the big idea that really holds up time and time again.
And in practice, what does that actually look like? Well, it's pretty straightforward. For the most part, get your fats from unsaturated sources, things like olive oil, nuts, avocados, fish. Don't be scared of a little butter here and there for taste. Absolutely stay away from those industrial trans fats and the ultra-processed junk they hide in. And, this is the big one, remember not to fall into that old trap of swapping out fat for a bunch of sugar and refined carbs.
Oh, and let's clear up one final classic point of confusion, the whole butter versus margarine debate. Look, the margarine you buy today is not the stuff from the 80s that was loaded with trans fats. It's almost always trans fat free now. So yeah, it's got less saturated fat than butter, but on the other hand, butter's big advantage is that it's a very simple, minimally processed food. At the end of the day, if your overall diet is solid, the difference between the two is probably pretty minor.
And I think this quote just nails the modern take on all this. It's not that butter suddenly became some kind of super health food. That's not what happened. What happened is that science figured out that the original idea that butter was this uniquely evil thing causing all the problems was just plain wrong. It's not a hero, but it's not the villain either. So we'll leave you with this final thought. Maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Instead of getting tangled up in this endless, is this food good, is this food bad debate, what if the simplest, most powerful way to think about food is just to ask, is it a whole food or is it a processed food? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us.